This week we're talking about literary naturalism. It's one of my favorite modules to talk about. You have Jack London, very popular writer, made a lot of money during his time. Stephen Crane, who died tragically young, and that gave his shape to a lot of his stories. And Ambrose Bierce, who disappeared in the Mexican Revolution. He went down there to help out Pancho Villa and was never seen again. But he was in the Civil War, and most of what he's written that we remember today is about the Civil War, the short stories. Let's talk about naturalism for a moment. It's a very harsh realism. So the age of realism starts with Mark Twain, and Henry James would be considered part of that. But he's in the genteel side of the Atlantic there. And it continues to develop through the 1880s. Into the 1890s, it takes on more of a Darwinian philosophy. Émile Zola out of France had been embracing Darwinism. So social Darwinism was coming in as a philosophy that the rich very much liked because it put them on top as the natural selection, the winners of natural selection, and it gave them an excuse to ignore the poor. So social Darwinianism is a very harsh look at society, and naturalism is a part of this, but it's much more sympathetic to those on the bottom. So you have writers that are seeing the social Darwinism and of nature and of society, but also they're very compassionate for those who are losing in the competition for survival. So you have Jack London, Call of the Wild, one of his most famous books. We're seeing the Inuits here in this story, the law of life, and the natural selection of the tribe is mimicking the natural selection of nature. And so the old man feels it's his place to get out of the way, to die, and even to be eaten by predators in the end is part of the natural way. So the Inuit are embracing this as a practical way to keep the tribe strong. And this really was a practice with those tribes of the North. I don't think Jack London judges them for it. He sees the necessity of it. I think the story is explaining the necessity of it and how it's a natural part of the chain of being. He was a socialist in his leanings, and so he felt very compassionate towards the poor, and he was an activist as a young man who sought to help those on the bottom. He became wealthy from his writings. He took some adventures. He went north to Alaska as part of the Klondike Gold Rush. He built a yacht and sailed to the South Seas and encountered some adventures down there, and wrote some very good South Sea short stories. The Sea Wolf is a novel he wrote. So he had a lot of experience as a sailor and as a hard worker. He worked a variety of manual labor jobs, wrote constantly, loved words. He kept vocabulary words written down. I've heard he even hung them on strings, so he was surrounded by words all the time. And just became very prolific. He also died somewhat young, in his early 40s. So Stephen Crane, you have The Open Boat here, which was based on something that actually happened to him. He survived a shipwreck off the coast of Florida. Newspapers around the country pronounced him as dead, that he had been lost at sea. And then several days later, he arrived on shore with this story to tell. So I think the story we're reading is a very accurate depiction. Okay, and with Ambrose Bierce, we have naturalism of the Civil War. So war is a extreme example of survival of the fittest. In all of these stories, you can think of chance occurrences versus determinism, as in predetermined events or fate, or free will, and see how all three of those play into the development of the story. So free will versus fate, determinism of natural law, and chance occurrences. In the naturalistic philosophy, man is an unnatural animal. He's lost his capability to have instincts that control his behavior. He uses his brain instead. And so while he can accomplish great things, it's a form of arrogance. And the arrogance leads to very strange deaths. So you look for that in the stories as well, that just the idea of building a boat puts you into an environment where you can't survive. We build airplanes, we build automobiles, we build this technology, and then it puts us in a situation where we're not the animal that evolution designed anymore. So our big brains end up getting us in trouble. That's certainly a part of these stories, that arrogance of free will leads to strange circumstances, and we're always surprised that we're facing death, and surprised that we have gotten ourselves into these situations. So I think Crane, in his poems that you're looking at, look for the irony, depression. He has a grim outlook, I think, on both nature and society. Atheism is a big part of this philosophy, so you're not going to have a God saving you. You're not going to have angels comforting you. Romance is gone, pretty much disappeared with the Civil War. So there can be the glee of a heroic moment, but it's passing. It's temporary. It's fleeting, and it's an illusion against the bigger picture of nature. So you see kind of a downward spiral, life leading to death, with new life being an illusion because it won't last. It's a pretty grim outlook on life in a lot of these stories. These guys were journalists, and so they covered a lot of stories that confirm that view for them. They were daredevils. They took risks, all three of these guys. And so they must have had some kind of sense of adventure to even put themselves out there, but then they saw how quickly it would all come to an end. And all three of them died before their time. Ambrose Bierce was an old man when he died, but he went and got involved in a war down in Mexico, and his death is a mystery. We don't really know what happened to him down there. So I really enjoy these stories because of the quality of the writing and the inner workings of the psychology. We're starting to see in realism here the workings of the mind. And we saw that last week with the women's stories as well. So we're getting to see a deep kind of complex psychology that pretty much mimics the way humans think, and that's why we can identify them. They seem like us. They seem to be confronted with the same kinds of problems that we face and to think about it in complex ways. And so you get to see a lot of the inner workings of the characters. They're very three-dimensional versus a flat two-dimensional characters. Comedies and adventure stories and romances tend to have two-dimensional flat characters without a lot of psychological realism. But here we're seeing fully developed characters. That's one reason I like reading these writers. The poems are strikingly modern. I don't know how Crane did it, really. He had Emily Dickinson. They're somewhat like Dickinson, but much more stark and minimal and image-driven and more ironic. So it's a minimal version of Dickinson. There's none of the exuberance of Whitman at all in there. And he's striking a mood that would become prevalent after World War I in modernism with the image school of poetry, somewhat similar to the Red Wheelbarrow poem we saw at the beginning of the semester. Okay, enjoy the readings. You guys are doing a great job on the forums. I'm going to talk to the tech people this week, see if we can work out the kinks in my responses. I don't think most of them are getting through. Shoot me an email if you have any questions. Thanks for listening.